The Ag Tribes Report is brought to you by Legacy Interviews, a video service that captures people as they really are, so the future knows who they really were. This Mother's Day, honor your parents with the opportunity to tell their stories and share the wisdom they've learned along the way. Here is Legacy Interviews guest Patricia Showalter on the fun she had reflecting on her life as an individual, a mother, and a grandmother.
I really didn't know what to expect.
Were you nervous about it before, or how did you feel about it before?
No, I just wondered what the heck was going to happen.
If somebody was on the fence, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I'd tell somebody to do it. Just go and have fun. I've had fun. You're only here for a short time. My grandkids are going to say, "Oh, holy cow, can we believe this stuff?"
Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report, a breakdown of the top stories affecting the culture of agriculture, with your host, Vance Crowe. The report begins in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Ag Tribes Report. I'm your host, Vance Crowe. Each week, I bring on a co-host that represents perspectives of one of the many ag tribes that collectively make up U.S. and Canadian agriculture. This week, we have my good friend and one of the people I admire most in the ag world, Chris Bennett, a journalist from Farm Journal. Chris is one of the rare rednecks that has the ability to find other rednecks out in the world, gets them to open up and tell their story, and the stories they have to tell are of grift, are of government overreach, and really some of the most shocking and amazing and important stories in all of agriculture. Chris Bennett, I couldn't be any happier than to welcome you to the Ag Tribes Report.
Hey, a most irreverent welcome, and I appreciate it like you can't believe, brother. It's a privilege to be on here. Love your show, love your format, no fluff, in the vein. Let's go, brother.
So you have been doing ag media for a very long time. What is ag media like right now?
Donald Trump, man, has sucked all the air out of the room. That's him by nature. And I would say that the driver, when I say driver, that's what I mean. The driver of all ag news right now is policy-related stories, which are normally, right, the most boring of the boring stories, but not right now. Things change literally by the day. And when I say those are the top stories, those are the 1, 2, 3, 4. Everything else is running distant second. That's reality.
Well, we're going to have some stuff to talk about with Trump because tonight we're going to explore Canada's bold economic shift away from the U.S. with Prime Minister Mark Carney promising autonomy and retaliatory tariffs away from what Trump is putting up. We're also going to talk about ADM's job cuts in the grain trading division, slashing up to 700 roles. Then we're going to talk about U.S. egg crisis. The prices are going down, what this means for farmers and what farmers like Jared McDaniel are saying about it. And we're also going to check in on the honeybee declines. There is big news yet again from some pretty big name ag universities saying their honeybees are on the decline. We're also going to do the Bitcoin land price report. We're going to hear Chris's Peter Thiel paradox and find out who he thinks is a worthy adversary. And we're going to try and do that all in just 30 minutes. So kicking it off, Canada plans to completely change their economic relationship with the United States. Today, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney declared a shift in Canada's economic relationship with the U.S. He said the old relationship based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security cooperation is over. Take a listen to what else he had to say.
We will fight the U.S. tariffs with retaliatory trade actions of our own that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impacts here in Canada.
So facing U.S. tariffs, with Carney emphasizing that Canada is going to hit back, this, of course, is going to lead to more action from Trump. I think he has never backed down from a fight. Chris, Canada seems like they are trying to get in shape for the fight of the century. Who do you think are going to be the big winners and losers out of this fight?
You know, Vance, I think my opinion is that Carney is speaking to Trump, but he's looking at Pierre Poilievre. They got that election, at the end of April? something like April 28th. Don't quote me on that, but I'm close. And I think, it's just opinion, I think there's a lot of peacocking going on. I don't necessarily blame Carney, but I do think he wants to flex his biceps right now. And look, my opinion is that Canada is going to bite off more than they can chew with this Carney fella. You talk about putting a World Economic Forum guy, a banker, climate alarmist in the extreme at the wheel. He's your man, just like Rishi Sunak was in England. He's a banker. Oh, Macron, he's a banker. This fella Carney is cut from that same fabric. And shoot, man, when I talk to farmers in Canada, since time immemorial, great fellas, just great people, ideologically seem aligned with rural America. So I hope that Pierre wins and him and Trump can sit down and talk brass tacks. Trump is opening the books. It's a very painful process. I support the process, but he's looking at the numbers and saying, what are we going to cut? What are we going to fix? All of that is going on in the background. As you and I speak, I hope that, a couple of years from now, this is a tempest in a teapot. But we all know where Canada ranks on the ag export list. We know where the U.S. does on Canada's ag export list and many other things as well. We know the problems with fentanyl at the border. We know the problems with Chinese businesses pumping products into the U.S. from Canada and others as well. So how does this end? I don't know. Once again, I hope Trump and Mr. Polyev sit down and hash it out. If Polyev wins. If he doesn't, I don't know where it goes, Mr. Carney.
It seems clear to me that whatever ship shaping he's talking about doing, we're going to do these big economic reforms inside of Canada, need to be done. I mean, they have an incredibly complicated trade system within their own country. We were talking just last week about the interprovincial tariffs. And I think that Pierre Polyev, all the way up until this point, got to take the big muscle. We're gonna push back on the U.S. and we're gonna do these things. And now Carney's doing it. It's gonna be interesting to see what this kind of puffing up goes. But I can tell you, I am hearing from my friends out west, and I've had a chance to visit Canadian West several times. I've heard multiple people say there will be secession in the air if Carney wins. And I told that to some of my American friends, and they kind of laugh at it. But I don't think these Canadians are laughing.
Vance, I want to ask you about that. What is your opinion? What's the feel from the fellas that you speak with in Alberta, for example, on secession? Not next year. I don't mean that, but is it something that they feel will happen in the next 20 to 30 years? Is it on the clock, so to speak?
I think they've thought this for a long time. I mean, I can remember being at a talk back before COVID, where a guy stood up and said, and that's why I think, Alberta should become the 51st state of the union. And everybody clapped and cheered, and they thought it was a great idea. A room full of people. I thought it was going to go down badly, but it didn't. And I think it's because the West has been getting slapped down, beat up. They've been taken advantage of. They have all these natural resources, and they're just getting extracted from the East. So I think the West, and I was just in the East, I was in Ontario, the East feels very differently than the West. I think the East isn't even prepared for how serious the West is about secession. I don't think we're talking 20 years. I think we're talking 5.
Well, it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how these cards play out. Certainly in the coming weeks, it won't be the last headline that Carney grabs. I'm guessing the headlines that we all read today help him in the polls. I don't know that. That's just a guess, because it's him and Polyev, one of them coming out of the pack. So here we go.
All right, on to headline number 2. This is from Reuters. ADM cuts jobs in the grain trading division. I saw this because Grain Stats, one of the best follows on X, posted about the job cuts. ADM said in February that it would cut 700 jobs and reduce costs by $500 to $750 million in the next 3 to 5 years, after posting its lowest fourth quarter adjusted profits in 6 years. The job cuts would represent about 1.7% of the company's global workforce, This particular wave of job cuts was aimed at its largest unit, the grain trading and oilseed processing divisions. So I personally know a trader that was let go as a result of this decision, and it seems like some of the heartache and burning that's gone on with grain trading is finally trickling down, and companies are having to make those kind of tough decisions. So, Chris, farmers typically don't have a lot of sympathy for traders, but this seems like a lot. What are you hearing out there?
Yeah, there's natural friction between the two, arguably, as it should be. Not to make light of anything, but ADM, you got to ask tongue in cheek, do the 700 jobs that get axed, are they replaced by 1,000 H-1B visa applications? The pulse, what you feel, what you see when you see a headline like this is what's going on, not just in agriculture, but across the country. And that is, everyone seems to be, I'm talking about average Joe and Jane included, everyone seems to be taking stock of employees, who does what, amount of money spent. All of this going on, of course, with Doge in the background. But audit here, audit there, questions that no one wants answered, but everyone wants asked. Again, I say, Trump wants to open the books on all of it. And it's a very nasty, painful process. But I personally believe it has to be. The light has to be shined in. So I don't know how it all translates out, but we are at a point, not speaking of ADM, but a larger point, my Lord, Vance. USDA, right? What is it? When is it instituted? Maybe 1862, not far off there. And you look at USDA is created, that would be Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War. And just not too long after, we are now, several lifetimes after, we have what, roughly 100,000 employees, $200 billion budget. And I have a question for myself, got one for your listeners, got one for you, and that is, if we were fine, and we said, okay, yeah, USDA needs 100,000 employees, 100,000. At what point was I going to stand up and say something, or you, and say, you know what, 200,000, that's too many. You start asking these questions, you realize just what a Goliath all of this has become. Very uncomfortable, very nasty. Something must be done.
Well, to your point, in corporate America, the stat is that you can take the square root of the number of employees and they do half of all of the work in a given environment. And so, you have 100 employees. It is 10 of them are going to do 50% of the work. And I cannot possibly imagine what it's like when it comes to government. I bet it's, something even smaller than that. And, when you talk about the USDA, I used to tell people this all the time. If you go to Washington, D.C. and you drive past the USDA, you have to go past multiple stoplights, and the whole thing is a gigantic building of government employees. And I have no answer for this other than just cut way, way beyond what you should cut. And then if we find out, we messed up some services, there was something we needed here, then bring it back. But I think that will be when we get closer to 1,000 employees than 50,000, and certainly more than 200,000.
Yeah, why is that USDA building not in Iowa? Why is that USDA building not in Kansas or Nebraska?
Kearney, Nebraska is what I always say. Yeah, put it out there so that way there's no bureaucrats that are just jumping through the USDA that love being out in Washington, D.C., and instead they have to go out to somewhere in the middle of nowhere and be among farmers, be among you rednecks.
Right. I'm not picking on USDA because all government departments fall into that same pattern. Right. But USDA, by definition, is part of the bureaucracy. So, by the way, I just saw today, I mean, it may have came out before, but I saw Brooke Rollins. She posted a video on social media holding up the packs of tomato seeds. If you didn't see that, if your followers didn't see that, the USDA apparently had printed off these packs of tomato seeds that were diversity, equity, and inclusion tomato seeds. And they had logos. They had a flyer that went with it in rainbow something. It was amazing. And she said, hey, we found these, here they are. She was just showing people. And when you see it, it just, your mind goes to what else has gone on in USDA that we're going to be finding out 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. It's a very uncomfortable feeling because it's going to be bloody.
Well, I'm glad to see that. I'm also looking forward to when they stop doing the let's beat down the DEI stuff. Let's just assume that it's all there. Cut it, get rid of it, quit doing the photo ops. And now let's get to cutting the other way bigger programs that really aren't just about the DEI initiatives and all this, because there is so much more fat there that is pork that was put in the 80s and the 90s, and it's people getting fat cat contracts for doing work that is not making things better. But we got to keep moving. Speaking of Brooke Rollins, the U.S. is buying hundreds of millions of eggs from South Korea, Turkey, and soon Brazil. This is what Donald Trump had to say about that.
And I want to just congratulate you, Brooke. What a job you've done over there with the eggs. And I don't know what the hell magic wand you use. And now they don't talk about it anymore. It's terrible. Well, we'll talk. We have to talk about it, If they don't talk about it, we talk about it, right, Brooke? But what a job you've done.
Well, speaking of talking about it, the way that they decided to bring down prices was that they're starting to import hundreds of millions of eggs, but also at the same time, it doesn't take that long for the egg market to bounce back. Surely they killed a lot of birds. Avian flu killed it, and then the government came in and tried to do a bunch of culling. But the temporary measures are aimed to ease consumer prices, which have surged up to 65%. And we're projected to rise another 41%. But with the repopulation, we've started to see egg prices go down. They've dropped nearly 50% since February of 2025. And the pledge alone of bringing in eggs from South Korea and some of these other countries was enough to bring some of the prices down. But somebody like Jared McDaniel took to X and pointed out that if farmers command high prices, the government is going to come in and say, wait, the consumers want lower prices, so we're going to add supply in. He's not wrong, right? At the moment when farmers are finally making hay when the sun is shining, the government comes in and undercuts them. What do you think, Chris? Is this a good strategy? Should the U.S. be bending to make sure eggs are priced for consumers, or should they be letting farmers make money at a valuable time?
No, sir. I don't agree with Ms. Rollins on this at all. We need government to move only in necessary areas, and that's it. So how many Band-Aids will you apply? It goes to the larger question. This month was what, 10 billion in payments, something like that from USDA to producers. I'll bluntly say I don't agree with any of that. You look at something like an egg, right? You think we're going to import eggs from Turkey, from South Korea. Once again, government needs to be involved only when and where necessary, and that's it. I absolutely believe in economic hardball, and that is not it. It's just my position, always has been since the 1930s, since FDR and his big government approach. It's been detrimental to agriculture. To me, the more you get government involved, the worse things get long term. It's a Faustian deal, however you pronounce that. So whether it's ethanol mandates, whether it's crop insurance, whether it's crop subsidies, there is a price you will pay down the road. So it's peaches and cream for one producer, but maybe for the grandson or the great grandson, they will be put through hell later. You got to pay at some point.
And what about the egg farmer that said, the egg prices are finally high enough, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to put together a couple of barns, and I'm going to go out and buy those eggs, and I'm going to put my family's future on the line by making this capital investment. And oh, boom, now the U.S. government is undercutting them. It seems like sabotage. And I think like it's so easy to say, oh, I'm all for farmers. I'm all for farmers. But then when you want to get those consumers votes, then you go out and you start buying eggs on the cheap from somewhere else. I hate it. I think it's a bad sign. And I think it certainly should be considered anti-American to do that.
Yeah, Vance, there's a strong knee-jerk element to it to me, and I'm just thinking, all right, eggs from South Korea and Turkey, whose palm got crossed with silver here? Because it's just not adding up to me. Period.
All right, let's move on to the final headline. Worry spreads that the honeybee population is in decline. Losses of commercial honeybee colonies are projected to be the highest on record in the last decade, according to the Washington State University scientist press release that came out saying colonies could decline by up to 70% this year. While there's been a steady decline in bee populations, according to the release, there is no definitive cause as to why the colony losses are higher this year. The scientists posit that it could be a combination of nutrition issues, mite infestation, diseases, as well as, and they stick this in at the end, pesticide exposure. So, Chris, with a press release like this coming out, are you worried about honeybees?
I'm fascinated by honeybees and certainly recognize the general role that they play, which is integral to agriculture. However, I'm just going to come with a man in the street comment here. And the honeybee deal, right? How many times have we heard it was the end of the world for honeybees? We've heard it over and over and over. So now I think we're actually at the point when they come out with releases like this, everyone ignores it because you've heard it seemingly year by year for the last 20 years. I'm not saying their report doesn't have merit. I'm not saying it's not true. I don't know. I just know that when I see this kind of thing, I walk on.
I'm the same way. I actually had a really good chance to meet a beekeeper named Jerry Hayes. He now runs Bee Culture magazine. And until that guy comes to me and says, Vance, this is a real problem, I have to believe that a lot of these scientists are trying to make sure their press release gets coverage. It is something that people feel really deep about. It's like saying kittens are dying. And it may be true. But I think that there's been a lot of hyperbole here, and it's really dangerous. And I actually think if the ag community is hearing this, they should be doing everything they can to get out there and verify whether or not these scientists have real data and it's the right thing, because the next step will be, well, why don't we just ban pesticides? But they're not going to look closely at what pesticides actually hurt bees, how it works, what are the rules. They're just going to say, that's the pesticide. I hear this word neonicotinoids. I feel like I know what it is because I know this fancy word. That's the one that should get banned. So if ag is not operationalizing right now, you are already behind the 8 ball.
Right. I feel like there's a boy who cried wolf element to the whole thing. That's just opinion.
Yeah, Carl Schlegel says every year. All right, so that is going to do it for our headlines this week. If you have any headlines you think we should cover, it is so helpful to me if you'll send them to Vance@legacyinterviews.com or send them to me on X @VanceCrow. Moving on to the Bitcoin land price report. Last week, Bitcoin was up 4%, making it to $84,380. And today we're sitting at $87,475, which is up 3.6%. Now, as a long-term Bitcoin holder, I can say I'm not actually all that excited about it. I like sale prices. It was getting good for a little while, but it looks like prices are headed slowly back up. But we're talking about Bitcoin in terms of land prices. So, Chris, where do you live, and how much does an acre of high-quality farm ground cost where you are?
I live in northeast Mississippi, very close to the Lafayette and Union County line. I do my living, I guess you could say, in Union County. And acreage would be anywhere from, I'm going to say 4,500 per acre.
And what are people growing on a $4,500 acre of land?
Predominantly right here is going to be soybeans. And then I would reckon forage hay would come next, and followed by corn. Number 3, your cotton would be just a stone's throw away. Cotton and rice would be a little bit further. And I don't know for a fact, but I'm guessing there's some sweet taters in the ground too.
All right. So at $4,500 an acre, that means 1 acre is worth 0.051 Bitcoin. Or to put it in another term, 1 Bitcoin would purchase you just about 19.4 acres. How does that sit with you, Chris?
It rocks and rolls with me. A few years ago, I did not understand Bitcoin. I do not understand it now. But I said, I'm not going to watch this from a historical perspective. I'm not going to sit here. And, you tell your kid, when you go to get to the plate, don't you watch strike 3 without swinging. Don't that, if it goes by, you swing. So here it came. I put what I could afford in there, Vance, and I put it in long term. Just leave it. I just put it in there for the kids. So I enjoy watching it. What do I think is going to happen with Bitcoin? Personally, I think it's got legs. I don't see how you can mock Bitcoin. I don't see how you can say it's based on fantasy when our normal currency, our normal dollar or dinar or pound is also based on an agreed lie. So I'm very curious, and I definitely consider buying more. Buy what you can afford to lose.
Well, man, you are singing my song. I absolutely agree with this. And I think one of the best parts about buying even just a little bit of Bitcoin is you've had a ton of questions. Unless you've bought Bitcoin and done all the way to mining and setting up a node, you have questions, but you won't know exactly how to even ask that question until you go buy a little bit. And then you're like, all right, how does this work? And then how do I move it off a wallet? And what does this mean? So I think anytime somebody touches it, one of the things I've been doing lately is talking about Bitcoin. I wanted to throw up this graph right here. So the yellow line on this graph is the price, and you can see it's going up, and it kind of goes up and down, up and down. But the green line here, that is actually maybe even more interesting. What that line represents is how many Bitcoin are listed on exchanges right now. And this shows, I think, about 3 years worth of Bitcoin. And as it turns out, we are just 30,000 coins away from being the lowest amount on exchanges in the history of exchanges having Bitcoin. There is now, I think it's 2.8, and I think the lowest amount there's ever been is 2.7 Bitcoin, 2.17. I'm sorry, and we are really just we're about to find out what happens when that number starts dropping down below 2 million. And the interesting thing about Bitcoin is, unlike stock, when the price of a stock goes up, the people on the board say, you know what, this price is so high, why don't we just issue some more stock? And then that dilutes you, and it gives them a chance to bring more money into the company. Well, with Bitcoin, you can't do that. So we've never seen a market where you literally can't bring any more on. The closest thing would either be land or maybe heifers, because it takes so long to bring them on. When demand starts going up, it is going to have an impact on the price. So I just thought, if you ever want to see a very cool chart, go out to, this comes from CoinGlass, so you can check that out. And if you are interested in purchasing Bitcoin, I recommend the river.com as a place to buy Bitcoin. I switched. I used to use another platform, and when I switched over to River and I set up a regular purchase, it made it so I didn't have fees on my purchase. So they have supported the show by saying, hey, if people buy using my show code link, then we'll give the show Bitcoin. And so check out river.com. I will put it in the show notes below. All right, moving on to the Peter Thiel paradox. This is where I'm going to ask Chris, what is one thing that you believe that no one in your tribe agrees with you on?
I personally believe that I'll just say it, the Beef Act, 1985, the Soybean Act, roughly 1990. I believe those are antithetical to the U.S. Constitution. I'll challenge anybody. Go back and read that Beef Order in 85. Go back and read the Soybean Act. The dollar per head. And
I'm hooked. What is this? What do they even talk about? I couldn't tell you what they are.
The Beef Act of 85 gave $1 per head, $1 a cow, for research, beef council, and so on. It was part of the Farm Bill. In 1990, the Soybean Act did the same thing. Took I think a half of 1% of every soybean sale and pumped it into research. Soybean Association, a lot more groups. I look at it now, these years later, and I think that ain't kosher with the Constitution. Now, the money may go to fantastic research, marketing, and so on, but I look back and I think I can't go with those. It strikes me again of the troubles that we have in so many areas of this country right now, and that's extra constitutional action by the government. And your next generation goes to sleep, and then the generation after that asks, hey, how did this get instituted to begin with? Questions like EPA and NRCS, hey, how did they manage to get this regulation and this code passed? And you go back and check and see, you think about your constitutional fathers, right? Think about old Jimmy Madison when he writes the Bill of Rights. And you think, what would old Jimmy think? And no, seriously, James Madison would not abide these things, these paths that we have gone down. And that's not just an old man talking. It's simply the fact. And I say, you go back and read these documents and you think, how did this happen? How did this happen? So we, as the next generations, wake up, read the stuff, hold our reps and our senators accountable. How many of our senators and reps right now as I speak, in Washington, D.C., have read the Constitution itself, right? How many of them could rattle off the Bill of Rights? And I say in totality for both of those, not many senators and reps, and that is one heck of an indictment, but I do believe that.
Well, I got to say, everything you're saying resonates with me. I am so against anything that's mandated that I have trouble even communicating with my friends sometimes, where I'm like, that's something you support, I don't. And so, but I had never thought about it actually as a constitutional argument. I've heard people say they didn't want to have it be a law, but I actually didn't even realize those, the way that those were brought into being. So I got to give you a higher score. I think there are a lot of people that already agree with you, but the fact that you brought the heat and the receipts when it came to where did these things come into existence. So I'm going to give you an 8.5 on that one.
Hey, Vance, let me add also, since I'm throwing things out that I don't agree with, I don't agree with flat bill caps, gender reveal parties, men wearing Lululemon clothes, travel ball kids running around with all these trophy rings. Hey, I'm just a curmudgeon. But anyway, there it is.
Well, I love it. Yeah, and actually, then we'll go an 8.6. We'll give you another extra 0.1 on that for throwing more out there. All right, now we're going to do your worthy adversary. Who is one person that you respect, but you strongly disagree with on social media?
The gentleman's handle is at Pharaoh_Q_Lucas, I believe. He's independent thinker. That's his name, independent thinker. And on Twitter all the time, he posts all these IRA money, post the Inflation Reduction Act money, government money that's been pumped into all sectors of the agriculture industry, including agriculture media. So you can tar and feather me as well. But he posts these things and they're fantastic because they show you where all the money has been thrown against the wall without hardly any reckoning or responsibility. At the same time, this fella's kind of feely, kind of touchy-feely, puts kind of floaty statements out there as well. And that's not my kind of thing. But if you just want something to chew on that you may or may not agree, I like him. He's good, and he will show you something that you won't be getting elsewhere. You may see a company name, or you may see someone in agriculture pop up on one of his lists that makes you very uncomfortable. Or you may see your own name pop up on there. So, hey, put the light on it. Open the books.
I think that's a good one. I will get his name on the Worthy Adversary list. If you're interested in this list, it is great. I have it on X. You can go to my profile, look at my lists, and it is a list of worthy adversaries, and we will get him on there. I have to throw this one out there. I saw a farmer today that got quite a bit of positive feedback. I even saw some negative feedback, where he was talking about the need for the bailouts, and that there would otherwise be farmer suicides as a result of this. And I respect that man. I've seen him post things before, but I think that is deeply the wrong approach. I think to say that men are going to kill themselves, men and women are going to take their own lives if they don't get money from the government, is something that I don't know. I really buck against. I maybe should have put this in the Peter Thiel paradox. I feel for people. I have personally been in spots where I'm like, how am I going to take care of my family? What am I going to have to give up that I don't want to give up? And there's something I feel really strongly about this, and it's not to say that I don't understand or I don't appreciate his plight or how difficult and dangerous a time when people are going through this. But man, I really don't like when somebody says you better give the money, otherwise people are going to take their lives.
I agree 100% with you, Vance. And to me, it screams out, hey, here's the end result of what happens when you get government involved over and over and over at various levels of agriculture. Again, dating back to the 1930s. It's not hard to figure out. If a fella says to you, hey, I can't farm, right? I can't make a living without X or Y from the government, or all the above from the government, right? He was partially put into that situation by the government, by programs decade after decade after decade that were too big of plums, that were such low-hanging fruit it couldn't pass up. So now we are where we are. And I'm not an economist by any means. I don't have a magic wand. I don't know how to interpret and to fix it all. But I do know that when government gets involved, whether that's ethanol mandate, carbon credits, or a myriad of other things, decades down the road, it always ends bad. That I know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's once the government's involved, there is inevitably going to be a bubble. If they take away risk like they did with student loans, now all of a sudden you're going to have kids that can take away, huge student loans and then are buried under them and cause all these problems for their getting married and having kids and all kinds of other problems. And they're sitting there being like, "What? We're trying to help. We tried to make it easy to go to college." I think the same thing happens in farming, and it's sad, but I think the conversation about mental health shouldn't be about if we don't get this, then what? It should be, hey, if you've got to make changes, this is what happened to me, or this is what happened to my farm, and this is how I moved on, and this is what was on the other side of that tunnel. I've just done too many legacy interviews where I've heard of families making big changes that they didn't want to make, but they said 20, 30 years later, that was the right decision. That's what we had to do, and even though it was hard.
Tenfold. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for this week's Ag Tribes Report, but we are 6 weeks away from Mother's Day, so I'm going to spring this question on you, Chris. I didn't prepare you for it. I've been asking guests questions about their own mothers. What is a turn of phrase that your mom has that still rings in your ears today?
Man, Vance, my mom is the best in the world. Something about, hey, you're going to have to cut your own switch.
Did you have to cut your own switch back in the day?
Oh, I did. I did have to a few times. No, I didn't have to because there wasn't, there was always some leather somewhere she could grab. But let me tell you something, man. Every whooping I got, I needed it. I probably needed a heck of a lot more, actually.
Well, I can relate. My mother used to, she's going to be mad that I told this, but she doesn't listen to the show. So she used to get a hairbrush, and that for me and my brother. And I remember one time putting a bunch of toilet paper in our pants and then going and getting in trouble. And I never got a harder spanking than I did when my mom did the first spanking and found out there was toilet paper in there. And then I got a bare bottom spanking.
Oh, man. Hey, listen, corporal punishment. Let's bring it back to American schools and we'll change them, brother. You eat corporal punishment with holes drilled in the paddle. That's our solution right there. Turn the country around.
Well, if you are interested in doing something that's really special for your mother or grandmother, consider doing a legacy interview. I can tell you that the stories you will get from your mother will surprise you, they will delight you, and you will learn things about her. And you're going to give her an experience that is truly deeply meaningful. So check out legacyinterviews.com for more on that. Chris, if people wanted to learn more about you, read your stories, where should they go?
I'm out there on Twitter at Chris Bennett MS. You can Google my name on the Farm Journal website, agweb.com. My email's out there, and holler anytime. I'm always looking for something wild. Got one coming out, Vance, very wild, on 4 siblings that were in their 70s that ran a $10+ million scam on USDA. You talk about a geriatric heist, right? Golden Girls. This is it, brother.
Oh, man. Can't wait. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for that. I'm also continuing to run my Satoshi's prompt. If you go to river.com and you sign up for the app and you download it, you can send me a Lightning Wallet receive address. And if you do, I will send you 75 Satoshis. We've been cutting that down in half every time, but I will include my link in the show notes so you can support the show by buying Bitcoin with river.com. All right, that's going to do it this week. We'll be back next week with a different host. And as always, feel free to disagree.